Failure does not begin the way most people think it does. It does not start with collapse. It does not announce itself with crisis. It rarely comes with pain loud enough to force attention. The most dangerous state is quieter than that. Everything still works. You still function. You still do what needs to be done. On the surface, nothing is broken. But underneath, direction has already slipped. This is the phase where people say they are fine. They are not stuck. They are not failing. They are just moving, doing, repeating. And that is precisely the problem. When motion continues without direction, a system does not hold steady. It degrades, slowly, invisibly, without asking for permission. This is not a character flaw. It is not laziness. It is not a lack of motivation or discipline. What you are experiencing is a loop, a sequence of operations running on autopilot, choosing the same outcomes again and again, regardless of what you intend. Once that loop is active, it does not need conscious decisions to continue. It sustains itself. And here is the part most people miss. There is no neutral state. You are not standing still while you figure things out. You are either operating a system that moves you forward, or you are drifting inside one that erodes you over time. Stability is not safety. Stability without direction is decay. This book does not exist to inspire you. It exists to show you what is already running beneath the surface, because once you can see the loop clearly, you lose the ability to pretend it is not there. And from that point on, doing nothing is no longer an option. Chapter 1. The Drift. The most dangerous state is not collapse. Collapse is loud. Collapse is visible. Collapse forces action. The most dangerous state is when everything still seems to be working. When life is moving, routines are intact, responsibilities are being met, but direction has already slipped. Nothing looks broken. Nothing feels urgent. And that is exactly why it is deadly. When there is no obvious problem to name, no clear failure to react to, the system does not stop. It drifts, quietly, gradually, without resistance, and once drift begins unnoticed, everything that follows no longer requires a decision. It simply activates. Drift is not falling apart. Drift is not chaos. Drift does not announce itself. There is no crisis, no dramatic moment where everything collapses at once. Drift exists in a much more deceptive form. The surface still looks stable. Life still functions. You still wake up, go to work, complete tasks, meet expectations. From the outside, nothing is wrong. From the inside, direction is already gone. That is why drift survives so long. It does not create pain fast enough to demand correction. It does not cross the threshold that forces intervention, and because it feels manageable, it is tolerated. Because it is tolerated, it compounds. Collapse happens after damage is visible. Drift happens while everything still looks fine. Collapse demands attention. Drift avoids it. Collapse feels like failure. Drift feels like neutrality, but there is no neutral state. The system is either being guided or it is sliding. Drift is simply misalignment without consequence yet. and yet is the most expensive word in the system. Drift is hard to detect because it produces no immediate penalty. There is no single mistake, no obvious loss, no clear breaking point. There is no moment that forces you to say, "Something is wrong." You are not failing. You are not losing. You are not even struggling. You are simply no longer moving toward anything that matters. And because there is no sharp pain, there is no urgency to fix it. The system continues operating under the illusion that stability equals safety. It does not. Human systems do not collapse the moment direction is lost. They decay first. Direction disappears quietly. Structure weakens gradually. Standards soften. Decisions become reactive instead of intentional. None of this feels dramatic. None of this feels dangerous. That is why it goes untreated. Drift exists in the space where things are not bad enough to demand change, but no longer good enough to justify staying the same. That space is where erosion begins. Loss of direction is not the result of addiction, self-destruction, or failure. Those come later. Direction is lost first. You do not need to be reckless. You do not need to be self-destructive. You do not need to make terrible decisions. All it takes is the absence of a clear direction forward when there is nothing meaningful to move toward. The system does not stop. It recalibrates. It begins to drift toward whatever is easiest, most stimulating, or most immediately rewarding. This is not a moral failure. It is a mechanical one. A system without direction does not remain idle. It seeks substitutes when there is no forward axis. Behavior reorganizes itself around short-term relief. Comfort replaces progress. Stimulation replaces meaning. Distraction replaces movement, not because of weakness, but because the system requires a signal. Without a legitimate target, it will generate its own. That is how drift transitions into something worse without ever announcing the change. Drift always comes before the loop, before addiction, before self-destruction, before visible collapse. By the time those appear, drift has already done its work. The system has already been misaligned long enough for corrective action to become expensive. When people try to intervene at that stage, they are always late. They are treating symptoms, not the starting point. They are reacting to damage instead of correcting direction. Late intervention feels intense, emotional, and exhausting because it is happening at the wrong layer, when drift is ignored. The system does not wait for permission to escalate. It does not ask whether you are ready. It does not require a conscious choice. That is the mistake most people make. They assume deterioration requires intention. It does not. It only requires neglect. Drift creates the conditions where destructive patterns can activate without resistance. Once that happens, behavior no longer feels chosen. It feels automatic. And by then, the cost of correction has multiplied. The real danger of drift is not what it does immediately. It is what it allows later, when direction is gone. There is no internal reference point to measure decisions against. Without that reference, everything feels equally valid or equally meaningless. Standards blur, boundaries weaken, small compromises stop feeling risky. Each one seems harmless on its own. Together, they form momentum, and momentum does not ask where you want to go. It only asks which way you are already moving. If drift is not named, it cannot be addressed. If it cannot be addressed, no corrective action is triggered. There is no reason to stop. no reason to rebuild, no reason to change course. The system remains operational while slowly losing integrity. This is why people are often shocked by their own collapse later. From their perspective, it came out of nowhere in reality. It was preceded by a long period of unchallenged drift. This is also why motivation, willpower, or insight alone cannot fix the problem. Drift is not a feeling, it is not a mood. It is a structural condition, as long as direction is missing. No amount of effort will stabilize the system. Effort applied without direction only increases movement, not progress. It accelerates drift. The system may feel busy, exhausted, or overwhelmed, but none of that restores alignment. It only masks the real issue longer. The cost of not naming drift is that the system is allowed to run itself. When that happens, it defaults to the path of least resistance, not because you chose it, but because nothing stopped it. This is where people lose agency without realizing it. They believe they are still in control because nothing has collapsed yet. But control is not measured by the absence of disaster. It is measured by the presence of direction. If drift is not identified early, everything that follows will be analyzed incorrectly. Addiction will be framed as a personal flaw. Burnout will be framed as a workload issue. Self-destruction will be framed as bad habits. All of those interpretations miss the point. They are downstream effects. The upstream failure is simpler and more dangerous. The system was allowed to operate without a clear direction long enough for misalignment to become normal. This chapter does not exist to inspire change. It exists to force correct diagnosis. If you cannot call drift by its name, every solution you apply later will target the wrong problem. You will try to fix behavior without fixing direction. You will try to manage symptoms while ignoring the structure that produced them. That approach always fails. Not because the effort is insufficient, but because it is applied too late and at the wrong level. Here is the law that cannot be negotiated if drift is not recognized. The loop does not require choice to begin. It activates automatically. Once direction is gone and remains uncorrected, the system will reorganize itself around substitutes. That process is mechanical. It does not care about intention, intelligence, or values. It only responds to what is present and what is absent. Until drift is named, nothing else in this book can be applied correctly. Every analysis, every mechanism, every intervention that follows depends on starting at the right point. That point is not collapse. It is not addiction. It is not failure. It is drift. And if you cannot see it, you are already inside it. To understand what is running underneath everything that feels out of control, you must stop looking for dramatic mistakes and start examining the quiet process that began long before anything broke. The next step is not to fix yourself. The next step is to see the system that has already been activated. That system is the loop, and it does not wait for permission to run. Chapter 6. No structure, no action. Most failure does not come from not acting. It comes from acting without permission. People assume movement equals progress. They assume effort earns legitimacy. It does not. When action is treated as a default right, every attempt begins under the wrong law, outside structure. Action has no standing. It does not count. It does not accumulate. It does not build anything that can last. Action is not a natural entitlement. It is a privilege. And every privilege has a condition. The condition is not motivation. It is not desire. It is not urgency. The condition is structure, Until structure exists, action is unauthorized. That is the law. It does not negotiate. Most people violate this law daily without realizing it. They act because they feel behind. They act because they feel guilty. They act because they feel pressure to do something, anything, to reduce discomfort. None of that grants permission. Movement driven by pressure is still illegal movement. It creates noise, not progress. It creates exhaustion, not results. And over time, it trains the system to confuse activity with legitimacy. Action outside structure is invalid action. Without structure, there is no standard. Without a standard, there is no way to distinguish right from wrong, effective from wasteful, progress from motion. If an action cannot be evaluated, it cannot be trusted. If it cannot be trusted, it cannot be repeated reliably. And if it cannot be repeated, it does not qualify as a system. It is a reaction. This is where most people lose the plot. They believe the problem is inconsistency. It is not. The problem is authorization. They keep trying to fix behavior by increasing effort while ignoring the condition that makes behavior legitimate in the first place. They push harder, commit louder, and promise more. The system does not care. Effort does not override law. Structure exists to answer a single question before any movement begins. Is this action allowed to exist? If there is no structure, the answer is no. That answer does not change because you feel inspired. It does not change because the stakes feel high. It does not change because time feels short. Conditions do not bend to emotion. Motivation fluctuates. Energy fluctuates. Mood fluctuates. Any action that requires a stable internal state to be valid is already disqualified. Systems that depend on how you feel will collapse under the first bad day. That is not a design flaw. It is a predictable outcome. Conditions that fluctuate cannot authorize behavior that needs to last. This is why action based on emotion is unstable. When motivation is present, action feels easy. When it disappears, action collapses. The problem is not a lack of discipline. The problem is that the action was never authorized by a condition strong enough to survive fluctuation. Emotion is not a condition. It is noise. The law of permission stands above motivation, willpower, and intention. It does not ask whether you want to act. It asks whether the system allows action to occur. That is the only question that matters. If the answer is no, acting anyway does not make you committed. It makes you undisciplined at the structural level before any action. Only one question is valid. Is the structure ready? Not. Do I feel ready? Not. Is this important? Not. Do I have time? Those questions belong to emotion, not authorization. If the structure is not ready, action is prohibited. If the structure is ready, action is permitted. There is no third option. This law destroys the fantasy of just start. Starting without structure does not build momentum. It builds chaos. It trains the system to move without rules. And once a system learns that rules are optional, it will break them when it matters most. That is how people end up busy, tired, and directionless while believing they are trying their best. Mission does not override this law. Mission does not grant permission by itself. A mission that is not installed into structure is a slogan. It sounds powerful. It feels meaningful. It authorizes nothing. Without structure, mission becomes emotional fuel that burns fast and leaves nothing behind. That is why people with strong ideals still fail to execute. Ideals do not authorize action. Structures do. Mission only becomes operational when it is embedded into structure, when it defines what actions are allowed, when they are allowed, and under what conditions they are executed. Until then, mission is decoration. It inspires movement without legitimacy. That kind of movement always collapses. There are no shortcuts around this law. You cannot compensate for missing structure with intensity. You cannot substitute clarity with effort. You cannot replace authorization with urgency. Any attempt to do so produces the same outcome. Short bursts of action followed by longer periods of regression. The system does not fail randomly. It fails predictably when permission is ignored. People often believe they need more discipline. They do not. Discipline without structure is still illegal action repeated. It looks impressive from the outside. It feels heroic on good days. But it is fragile. It breaks the moment conditions worsen. True discipline is not forcing yourself to act. It is refusing to act until conditions are legitimate. This reframes responsibility entirely. Responsibility is not doing more. Responsibility is obeying the law of permission. It is accepting that not all action is valid. It is accepting that waiting to build structure is not laziness. It is compliance. Eating too early is not courage. It is negligence. Once this law is understood, excuses collapse. You no longer blame mood, energy, or circumstances. You no longer ask how to feel more motivated. You ask a harder question. Why is the structure not ready? That question cannot be dodged. It points directly at design, not emotion. The system does not care how badly you want the outcome. It cares whether the conditions for action have been met, when they have not. Action is noise when they have. Action becomes inevitable. This is why properly structured systems feel almost boring. They do not rely on hype. They do not require constant recommitment. They simply run. The law is simple and absolute: no structure, no action. Any movement that bypasses this law does not count. It does not build trust. It does not accumulate progress. It does not earn results. It only increases fatigue and confusion. If you want action to matter, you must earn the right to act. This chapter is not asking you to do less. It is demanding that you stop acting illegally. Stop confusing urgency with permission. Stop mistaking effort for legitimacy. The system does not respond to force. It responds to conditions. Until structure exists, action is banned. When structure is in place, action is no longer optional. That is the trade. That is the discipline. That is the law. The next question is unavoidable. If action requires permission, and permission comes from structure, then the only thing that matters now is defining the minimum structure that must exist for behavior to be allowed to run. That structure cannot be vague. It cannot be flexible. It cannot be emotional. It must be precise enough to survive bad days. That is where this system moves next. Chapter 3. Meaning is a biological system. Most people think motivation disappears because they are weak, lazy, or broken. That belief is wrong. Motivation does not vanish randomly. It is not stolen by age, stress, or bad luck. Motivation is withdrawn by the system itself. when it no longer has a valid direction to serve. You can still wake up every day. You can still go to work. You can still complete tasks. Yet underneath, something is drifting. The reward system inside you is no longer aligned with where you are going. That misalignment is not emotional. It is biological. The dangerous part is this behavior can continue long after meaning has collapsed. You can stay busy, you can stay productive, you can even stay disciplined for a while. But if there is no clear direction to move toward, the system that is supposed to reward effort begins to malfunction. It starts sending signals elsewhere. That is when people feel empty despite doing a lot. That is when discipline feels heavy. That is when addiction quietly enters the picture, not as a moral failure, but as a mechanical outcome. The human brain is not designed to sit still. It is designed to move toward something when there is no target worth moving toward. It does not shut down. It compensates. It looks for alternative sources of reward. This is not a choice. This is not a flaw. This is how the system works. When progress disappears, the brain searches for dopamine through shortcuts. That search is automatic. That is why stagnation does not feel neutral. It feels restless, anxious, and unsatisfying even when nothing is obviously wrong. This is the first thing that must be understood clearly. People do not drift into addiction because they want pleasure more than success. They drift because the system that generates motivation has lost its reference point. Without direction, effort no longer produces the signal it is designed to produce. When effort stops being rewarded internally, the system looks for rewards that are easier to access. That is not weakness. That is biology filling a vacuum. Meaning is not a belief you choose. It is not a story you tell yourself. Meaning is the biological signal that tells your system where to allocate energy. When meaning is present, effort feels justified. When meaning disappears, effort feels pointless. That shift happens before you are aware of it. Long before people say they are unmotivated, their reward system has already stopped recognizing their actions as progress. This is why people can work hard and still feel lost. They are expending energy without moving toward anything that the system recognizes as valuable. Effort without direction produces fatigue, not drive. Action without progress produces irritation, not fulfillment, over time. The system stops cooperating. It stops releasing dopamine for work that goes nowhere. When that happens, motivation does not need to be killed. It simply dries up. Dopamine is not a reward for results. It is a signal for progress. It is released when the system believes you are moving towards something that matters. The critical word is moving. Results come later. Progress must be felt now. If there is no sense of forward movement, the signal does not fire. Waiting for outcomes to feel motivated is already too late. By the time results arrive, the system may have shut down its willingness to invest. This is where most people misunderstand motivation. They believe they need success first in order to feel driven. In reality, the system needs a direction first in order to release drive at all. Without direction, there is no incentive signal. Without an incentive signal, behavior becomes mechanical and fragile. It can be sustained for a short period through pressure, but it cannot survive long-term without breaking. The reward system operates on incentive, not consumption. Incentive reward activates when you are pursuing something valuable. Consumption reward activates when you are taking something that requires no pursuit. When direction is clear, Incentive reward dominates when direction disappears. Consumption reward takes over. That transition is subtle but devastating. It shifts the system from building to numbing. This is why waiting for motivation never works. Motivation is not a resource that appears on its own. It is the byproduct of a system that recognizes a valuable path forward. No path means no byproduct. No direction means no reason for the system to invest. The longer this state persists, the more the brain relies on artificial reward loops to compensate. The value of the goal matters, not emotionally. Biologically, small, vague, or meaningless goals produce weak signals. The system does not respond strongly to targets that do not justify effort. If the goal does not require sacrifice, it does not generate sustained drive. If the goal does not demand responsibility, it does not anchor behavior. This is not about ambition, it is about signal strength. A system cannot run on low signal forever. When the target is unclear or trivial, the reward system oscillates. Some days effort feels possible, other days it feels pointless. That instability is not a character flaw. It is feedback. The system is telling you that what you are aiming at is not enough to organize behavior over time when there is no meaningful target. The brain does what it is designed to do. It finds dopamine elsewhere. Food, screens, stimulation, escapism. These are not chosen because they are better. They are chosen because they are available. They require no direction. They require no sacrifice. They produce a signal immediately, in the absence of a legitimate path forward. The system defaults to whatever produces relief. This is how addiction enters the picture. Not as rebellion, not as moral collapse, as substitution. The system must reward something. If it cannot reward progress, it rewards consumption. If it cannot reward building, it rewards escape. That is not corruption, that is adaptation under poor conditions. Understanding this changes everything. It removes shame. It removes confusion. It removes the fantasy that motivation can be summoned through emotion alone. It places the responsibility where it belongs, on direction, not on mood, not on discipline, not on willpower. Meaning is not created by positive thinking. It is generated by movement towards something that carries weight. Weight is not about happiness. Weight is about responsibility. The heavier the responsibility, the stronger the signal. The system responds to what demands something from you. That is why shallow goals collapse under pressure. They do not justify pain. They do not justify sacrifice. They do not justify sustained effort. This is the unavoidable conclusion. Direction comes before motivation, always, when direction is present. Motivation follows as a consequence. When direction is absent, motivation cannot be forced. Any attempt to reverse this order leads to frustration. People try to fix motivation when the real problem is that there is nowhere meaningful to go. This chapter does not ask you to feel inspired. It does not ask you to believe in yourself. It does not ask you to change your attitude. It explains a law. If there is nothing worth moving toward, the reward system will eventually abandon you. It has no reason to cooperate. It is doing exactly what it was designed to do. The implication is simple and non-negotiable. If you want behavior to survive long-term, you must establish a valid direction before you build any structure around it. No amount of discipline can compensate for a missing target. No amount of motivation can replace a legitimate path forward. without direction. Every system rots from the inside. This is the point of no confusion. Meaning is not optional. It is not philosophical. It is biological. And without something real to move toward, the system will choose its own substitutes. That choice will not favor you. Chapter 4. Mission or Nihilism. The most dangerous state is not collapse. It is movement without direction. Your system is still running. Your days are still full. Your habits are still firing. But there is no axis pulling everything forward. No clear direction. No reason strong enough to organize behavior. When that happens, nothing looks broken. That is why it goes unnoticed. But underneath, the system has already started drifting. And drift is never neutral. Drift always leads somewhere. The only question is where. Here is the rule most people refuse to face: there is no such thing as standing still. A human system cannot pause in place. It either moves toward something or it decays toward something easier. When there is no mission, no defined direction worth suffering for, the system does not wait patiently. It chooses for you. It picks the path with the least resistance, the fastest relief, the easiest reward. That is not a character flaw. That is how the system is built. Direction is not optional. It is a requirement. This is where most people lie to themselves. They believe that if they are not actively destroying their life, they must be fine. They believe that as long as they are functioning, working, and getting through the day, nothing is wrong. But functioning without direction is not stability. It is delayed erosion, without a mission. Every action loses its reference point. There is no way to judge what matters and what does not. Everything feels equally heavy or equally meaningless. And when that happens, the system begins to rot quietly. Nihilism is not a philosophy people choose after deep reflection. It is the default state of a system with no mission. When there is nothing worth moving toward, nothing worth enduring pain for, the mind does not rise to a higher meaning. It sinks. It empties out. It starts asking questions that have no answers because there is no direction to anchor them. Life feels flat. Effort feels pointless. Discipline feels oppressive instead of useful. This is not because the person is weak. It is because the system has nothing to serve. The biology is simple. The reward system is designed to reinforce progress toward something valuable. Not pleasure, not comfort. Progress. When there is a clear target. Dopamine is released in response to movement toward it. When that target disappears, the system does not shut down. It reroutes. It looks for replacement rewards that are immediate, cheap, and reliable. This is where addiction enters, not as a moral failure, but as a logical substitute for direction. No mission means no meaningful progress signal. No progress signal means the system will take whatever reward it can get. This is why telling people to just stop never works. You cannot remove a substitute without restoring the original function. If there is no mission, there is nothing to replace the dopamine that progress used to provide. The system will always choose something. Scroll, consume, escape. Numb. Destroy slowly. That is not evil. That is automatic. The real problem is not addiction. The real problem is the absence of a mission powerful enough to organize behavior and justify pain. Most people avoid the word mission because they think it has to be beautiful, inspiring, aligned with passion. That is a lie that keeps them stuck. A mission does not need to feel good. It does not need to excite you. It does not need to impress anyone. It only needs one quality. It must be heavy enough to carry responsibility and pain. A mission that cannot justify discomfort is not a mission. It is a preference, and preferences collapse under pressure. Waiting for the right feeling before committing to a mission is backward. Feelings do not generate direction. Direction generates feelings later. This is the order the system obeys, whether you like it or not. Mission comes first. Motivation comes later. Meaning is not discovered by introspection. It is produced as a side effect of sustained effort in a chosen direction. Reverse the order and you get paralysis, confusion, endless searching, no movement. This is why there is no neutral ground. You are either operating under a mission or you are sliding into nihilism. There is no third option. You do not get to opt out of this law. If you do not choose a direction consciously, the system will default to whatever gives relief fastest. And once that happens, discipline feels impossible, not because you lack willpower, but because there is nothing to protect discipline for. Here is the hard line most people want to argue with without a mission. You have no right to expect motivation, discipline, or meaning to show up. The system does not reward indecision. It does not rescue people who refuse responsibility. It does not generate energy for nothing. If there is no mission, there is no reason for the system to work in your favor. Complaining about lack of drive without choosing a direction is incoherent. It is asking the system to perform without input. This is not punishment. It is not cruelty. It is structure. The system is built to allocate resources efficiently. Energy flows toward purpose. Attention follows direction. Effort sustains what matters. When nothing matters, everything drains. This is why people who avoid mission slowly lose their edge. Not all at once, not dramatically. They just become dull, less sharp, less dangerous, less capable of sustained effort. They drift. Choosing a mission is not about finding something perfect. It is about accepting a burden. A mission is something you are willing to be tired for. Something you are willing to be bored for. Something you are willing to sacrifice comfort for. It does not care about your mood. It does not negotiate with your emotions. It gives your actions a reference point so the system can finally lock in. Once a mission exists, everything changes structurally. Actions can be evaluated, habits can be filtered, distractions become obvious, pain becomes tolerable because it is no longer random, it is directional. Effort stops feeling like self-abuse and starts feeling like investment. This is where meaning comes from, not from reflection, from alignment between action and direction. Refusing to choose a mission does not protect you from pain. It guarantees a different kind of pain, aimless pain, meaningless effort, addictive relief followed by emptiness. The system does not stay idle. It either builds towards something or consumes itself. That is the choice. Whether you acknowledge it or not, there is no rescue coming. No burst of motivation will save a person who refuses to choose a direction. No technique will override the absence of mission. No amount of self-talk will replace structure. If you want the system to work, you must give it something to serve. That is the entry fee. Nothing else counts. This is the condition that cannot be bypassed. No mission means every behavior is unstable. Every habit eventually collapses. Every attempt at discipline turns into self-violence. The system cannot sustain effort without a reason that justifies suffering. That is not inspiration. That is physics. So the line is drawn here. Either you accept mission as a non-negotiable condition of operation, or you accept drift as your default future. There is no middle position, no safe pause, no neutral ground. Choose a mission or accept nihilism. The system will obey whichever you pick, and once mission is chosen as the axis, the next question becomes unavoidable if direction is set. What actually has the authority to keep behavior running over time? That is where the next problem begins. Chapter 5. The Willpower Lie. Most people still believe one dangerous sentence: I just need to try harder. They repeat it every time they fail. They repeat it every time they fall off track. They repeat it every time momentum dies. It sounds responsible. It sounds disciplined. But it is wrong. And that belief is quietly destroying their ability to move forward. The real problem is not effort. The real problem is that the entire system is being built on something unstable. When willpower becomes the pillar, the system is already compromised. No explanation is needed here. No motivation is required. This is a mechanical problem, not a moral one. If the structure depends on willpower, long-term execution is not guaranteed. It is only delayed failure. Willpower is not a fixed asset. It is a fluctuating resource. It rises and falls depending on fatigue, pressure, time, and environment. The same person can wake up one day and execute flawlessly, then struggle the next day to do the exact same task. Nothing changed in their values, nothing changed in their intelligence, nothing changed in their goals. What changed was the condition. Energy dropped, stress increased, the context shifted, and suddenly the system failed. That inconsistency is not a mystery. It is the expected outcome of using something unstable as a foundation. Anything that fluctuates cannot be trusted to hold long-term weight. That is not an opinion. That is how systems behave. A system that is meant to survive must function under bad conditions, not just good ones. It must run when energy is low. It must run when motivation is absent. It must run when pressure is high and when nothing feels rewarding. That is the minimum requirement. Willpower does not meet that requirement. Willpower performs best when conditions are favorable, when there is excitement, when there is clarity, when results feel close. The moment those conditions disappear, willpower weakens. A mechanism that only works when life is cooperative is not a system. It is a gamble, and gambling is not a strategy. This is where most people make a critical mistake. They assign willpower the wrong role. Willpower is not useless, but it is limited. Its proper role is ignition, not maintenance. Willpower can start movement. It cannot sustain it. It can help you begin. It cannot be trusted to keep you going. Using willpower to launch an action is appropriate. Using willpower to carry an action across weeks, months, and years is structural negligence. It is like using a match to heat a building. The tool is not wrong. The assignment is, when the system collapses, people blame themselves instead of the design. They say they are weak. They say they lack discipline. They say something is wrong with them. That conclusion is false. The failure came from misusing the tool, not from a lack of character. The consequences of this mistake are severe. When execution breaks down, the individual turns inward and assigns fault. Self-respect erodes. Self-trust collapses. Responsibility begins to feel heavy instead of empowering. Over time, this leads to avoidance. Promises are made with less conviction. Goals are lowered to avoid disappointment. The system enters a loop of stagnation reinforced by self-blame. Not because the person is incapable, but because the structure was never built to survive real conditions. A broken system always produces the same output, and blaming the operator does not fix the machine. The truth is uncomfortable but simple. Action is not a default right. It is a privilege that requires conditions. Without structure, action has no authority, it has no standard, it has no rule set. When action is treated as something you are allowed to do whenever you feel like it, behavior becomes chaotic, evaluation becomes impossible, consistency disappears. This is why relying on willpower feels heroic in the moment, but collapses over time. The system has no enforcement, no boundaries, no consequences. It is powered by mood, and mood cannot be trusted. This leads to a law that cannot be negotiated. If there is no structure, there is no permission to act. Action without structure is invalid. It does not count. It cannot be sustained. It cannot be evaluated. And it cannot build identity. This law stands above motivation, desire, and intention. It does not care how badly you want something. It only cares whether the conditions exist for action to run without negotiation. Willpower does not meet that standard. It is not stable enough. It is not enforceable, and it cannot be audited. This is why trying harder never solves the problem. Trying harder only increases strain on the weakest component. It does not strengthen the system. It accelerates burnout. It trains people to associate effort with failure. Over time, effort itself becomes threatening, not because effort is bad, but because it has been repeatedly deployed in a system that cannot hold it. The instruction to be more disciplined becomes meaningless when discipline is defined as emotional force instead of structural design. Force without containment always leaks, so the conclusion must be absolute. Willpower is disqualified from long-term operational control. It does not have the authority, it does not have the stability, and it does not have the consistency required to run behavior over time. It can initiate movement. Nothing more. Any system that depends on it for maintenance will fail. Not sometimes, not eventually, predictably. There is no path back to the old belief, no return to just push more, no permission to romanticize struggle. The moment this law is understood, the illusion collapses. Long-term behavior does not belong to willpower. It belongs to structure. And until structure exists, action itself is not allowed. That is not punishment. That is protection. This closes the door permanently. If behavior must survive beyond good days, willpower must be removed from the control seat. The only valid question left is no longer about motivation or effort. It is about conditions. Under what conditions is action permitted to exist at all? That question leads directly to the next chapter. Because once willpower is stripped of authority, something else must replace it. And only one thing qualifies. Chapter 7. The Four-Part Structure. The most common failure does not come from lack of purpose. Many people already have a mission. They know what they want to build. They know what matters. And yet their behavior still slips, not occasionally, repeatedly. This is not a mystery. A mission without structure has no authority. Direction alone does not control behavior without a forcing mechanism. Behavior defaults to convenience, and convenience always wins when nothing is actively stopping it. This is where most people make a fatal assumption. They believe that once a mission is clear, action will follow. It will not. Behavior is not neutral. It does not automatically align with what you care about. It aligns with whatever is easiest to execute under pressure, when structure is missing. Responsibility becomes optional, and when responsibility is optional, behavior loses legitimacy. There is a governing law here, and it does not negotiate. Outside of structure, there is no right to act. Action is not a natural right. It is a conditional privilege. If the conditions are not met, action is invalid. This is not about motivation. This is not about discipline. This is about permission. Without structure, behavior does not count, no matter how sincere the intention behind it. Failure, then, is not a reflection of ability. It is a reflection of system design. When behavior collapses, it is because the system allowed it to collapse. Blaming willpower is convenient. It avoids responsibility at the structural level. But willpower was never designed to carry long-term execution. A system that relies on willpower is a system that has already failed. To force behavior to run straight, structure must be fixed and non-negotiable, not flexible, not adaptive to mood. There are 4 parts to this structure, and their order cannot be changed. Remove one, and the system degrades. Rearrange them, and the system weakens. This is not a framework for inspiration. It is a mechanism for enforcement. The first part is the trigger. Behavior cannot be allowed to start with desire. Desire fluctuates. Energy fluctuates. Mood fluctuates. A trigger must be external, specific, and fixed. Time, location, signal, something that does not ask how you feel. If there is no trigger, behavior is not permitted to start. Not later, not when you feel ready, not when you want to. No trigger means no action. This removes the most dangerous variable from the system internal negotiation. The second part is the action, not an abstract goal, not a broad intention, a defined, limited movement, small enough to repeat, clear enough to execute without thought. Ambiguity is the enemy of consistency. When action is vague, discipline breaks. The system needs an action that can be executed even on bad days, especially on bad days. If the action cannot survive low energy, it does not belong in the structure. The third part is constraint. This is where most systems lie to themselves. They rely on self-control. They rely on good intentions. They rely on restraint. Constraint does not ask for restraint. It makes deviation difficult. If doing the wrong thing is easy, the structure has already failed. Constraint must be physical, environmental, or procedural. Something that blocks, delays, or penalizes deviation without requiring internal strength. If you can break your own rule without cost, the rule is imaginary. The fourth part is consequence. Immediate, concrete, non-emotional. Consequence is not punishment, it is feedback. Behavior must produce a result the system recognizes. Without consequence, repetition collapses. The reward system needs signal. That signal does not have to be pleasure. It has to be immediate. If nothing happens after action, the structure does not exist. Consequence is the proof that the system is alive. These 4 parts operate in sequence. Trigger initiates. Action executes. Constraint protects. Consequence locks the loop. Remove any part, and behavior begins to drift. Keep all 4, and behavior runs even when conditions are hostile. This is the entire point. Structure must win on bad days. If it only works when you feel good, It is decoration, not infrastructure. There are rules that govern how this structure is used. Once execution begins, decisions are not allowed. You do not evaluate. You do not negotiate. You do not optimize. You execute what has already been decided. Decision-making during action is how systems break. Freedom during execution is how drift re-enters. Structure reduces freedom to increase reliability. This is not a loss. It is a trade that works. Consider a work behavior. A fixed trigger activates at the same time every day. One defined action follows. A single task, clearly bounded. Constraints remove access to distraction. Consequence closes the loop immediately. No motivation is required. No inspiration is needed. The system runs because deviation is blocked and execution is simple. Consider training or study. The same logic applies. Trigger, action, constraint, consequence, miss one, and behavior slides. Add all four, and repetition stabilizes. This is not technique. This is enforcement. The purpose of examples is not to teach tricks. It is to demonstrate that the law holds regardless of context. What breaks most people is the presence of fake structure. It looks disciplined, but it collapses under pressure. Fake structure requires motivation to start. It allows flexibility based on mood. It has no real consequence. It feels productive, but it does not force behavior. Fake structure is self-help disguised as systems. It protects comfort, not execution. The signs are always the same. You need to feel ready. You adjust the plan depending on how you feel. Skipping has no cost. Nothing breaks when you break the rule. That is not structure. That is permission to drift with paperwork attached. Here is the closing law. Miss any one of the four parts, and behavior will eventually slide, not because you are weak, because the system allows it. Only when the structure is fully locked does behavior earn the right to exist. Until then, action is optional, and optional action never survives pressure. The next phase is inevitable. Once behavior is locked into a working structure, a new risk appears. Repetition builds power, and power, if not managed early, begins to take control. The next chapter addresses that moment. The point where behavior stops asking for permission, and intervention becomes urgent. Chapter 8. The point of no control. Most people believe they are in control because they still feel like they are choosing. That belief is usually false. Control does not disappear when life collapses. It disappears much earlier. While everything still looks manageable, the most dangerous moment is not when things fall apart. It is when behavior has already taken over, but the person executing it still believes they are in charge. At that point, the loss of command has already happened. It just has not been acknowledged. Control is not a feeling, it is a condition. You do not lose it when you feel weak. You lose it when actions begin to trigger themselves without waiting for permission. When behavior no longer pauses for evaluation, authority has already shifted. The system is no longer responding to decisions. It is responding to cues. That is the point where delay becomes expensive and denial becomes lethal. There is a specific moment where this shift occurs. It is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. There is no clear warning. Behavior simply starts activating on its own. You do not decide to do it. You notice yourself already doing it. That is the point of no control, not because you failed, but because you waited too long to intervene. The first mistake people make is treating this as a psychological issue. It is not. This is an operational problem. Loss of control is not an emotion. It is a change in how the system executes. When behavior self-initiates, command has moved. The system no longer asks. It acts. That single shift explains everything that follows. The first sign is subtle but absolute. You stop asking, "Should I?" The question disappears. There is no internal debate. There is no evaluation. A small signal appears, and behavior fires. The absence of the question is the signal. If there is no pause, there is no control. The belief that this is harmless is what allows the takeover to complete. People call this a harmless habit. They are wrong. A habit that no longer requires permission is not neutral. It is a claim of authority. Every time behavior executes without being questioned, it strengthens its position. Control does not disappear all at once. It erodes with repetition. The second sign confirms that the shift has already occurred. Justification comes after the action. The order reverses, instead of deciding and then acting. You act and then explain. The explanation feels reasonable. That is what makes it dangerous. Reason arrives too late to be in charge. When logic appears after behavior, authority has already changed hands. This is not about intelligence. Smart people rationalize just as efficiently. The presence of explanation does not indicate control. It indicates cleanup. The system is protecting behavior that has already happened. At that point, reasoning is no longer a governor. It is a defense mechanism. The third sign is physical and unmistakable. Stopping becomes harder than continuing. Initiation is easy. Interruption feels expensive. The longer behavior runs, the more energy it requires to shut it down. That energy cost is not imagined. It is mechanical. Momentum builds authority. When stopping costs more than proceeding, command has already slipped. This is where people misread the situation. They assume they are tired or unmotivated. They are wrong. The issue is not fatigue. It is hierarchy. Behavior has accumulated enough repetition to resist interruption. Control has not vanished. It has been outmatched. The fourth sign is the most critical, because it determines whether recovery is still cheap or already catastrophic. Small interventions stop working. Minor adjustments fail. Gentle corrections are rejected. The system pushes back. At that point, you are no longer negotiating with behavior. You are confronting it. When small fixes fail, only major disruption remains. This is where the cost curve spikes. Early intervention requires precision. Late intervention requires destruction. People delay because they hope to avoid discomfort. That delay guarantees a much higher price later. There is no scenario where waiting reduces the cost. Waiting only compounds it. All of this leads to the central law of this chapter. Behavior is not neutral. Repetition builds power. Unmanaged action accumulates authority. There is no such thing as letting it run for now. If it runs, it grows. If it grows, it demands control. Ignoring behavior is not passive. It is a decision to surrender authority. This law removes all ambiguity. Responsibility does not disappear when control is lost. It increases the moment you recognize the shift. The obligation to intervene becomes immediate. Not later, not when it gets worse, not when you feel ready. Timing determines everything. Intervention has a window. Early action requires minimal force. Late action requires system-level disruption. This is not a metaphor. It is an operational reality. Small corrections work only before behavior locks itself in. Once repetition crosses a threshold, soft control is no longer effective. This is why people believe change is hard. They are intervening too late. They wait until behavior feels overwhelming. By then, the system has already reorganized around it. Stopping feels extreme because it is. That extremity is not proof of failure. It is proof of delay. The solution is not more willpower. Willpower is irrelevant once behavior self-initiates. The solution is timing. Control must be exercised before execution, not during it, once behavior is running. Command has already been contested. Trying to negotiate mid-execution is how people lose. This is the principle that must be installed clearly. Intervention must occur before the trigger activates the behavior. After activation, options collapse. Before activation, leverage exists. That leverage disappears the moment behavior starts running. This is why points of forced interruption matter. They are not motivational tools. They are command checkpoints. They exist to prevent behavior from initiating without authorization. Without them, the system defaults to automation. Automation favors repetition, not intention. The point of no control is not a single moment. It is a process. It begins quietly. It accelerates through repetition. It becomes obvious only when reversal is expensive. Waiting for obviousness is the mistake. By the time it is obvious, the system has already chosen a side. This chapter does not offer comfort. It offers clarity. Control is not lost when things go wrong. It is lost when behavior is allowed to operate without supervision. Every unmanaged repetition is a vote against your authority. Every delayed intervention is a transfer of power. There is no neutral ground here. Either behavior waits for permission, or it does not. If it does not, command has already moved. Once you understand this, excuses disappear. There is no mystery left. There is only timing. The final rule is simple and unforgiving. Behavior that is not managed will take control. Delay multiplies the cost of correction. If you pass the point where small interventions still work, you will be forced into drastic measures. That is not punishment. That is math. Once behavior becomes familiar, once execution feels automatic, the point of no return approaches quickly. Past that point, recovery requires breaking the system, not adjusting it. That is the price of waiting. This is where responsibility becomes non-negotiable. If you want the system to survive long enough to produce results, control must be preserved before behavior runs on its own. That means intervention must happen early, decisively, and without negotiation. Lose command here, and nothing that follows will matter. Keep command here, and the system remains alive. That is the boundary this chapter draws. There is no softer version of this truth. Chapter 9, Operational Proof. The system rarely collapses because behavior is wrong. It collapses because it is judged too early. The most lethal question is not, did I fail? The most lethal question is, have I seen results yet? When that question is asked inside lag time, it kills systems that are actually working. The behavior may be correct, the structure may be intact, the execution may be clean. But the moment results are used as the signal to continue or stop, the system is already compromised. This is the phase where most people sabotage themselves without realizing it. They are doing the work. They are showing up. They are following the structure. But because there is no visible outcome yet, doubt enters, not as logic, as emotion disguised as logic. The system is still alive, but it is now being evaluated with the wrong metric. And the wrong metric always leads to the wrong decision. Results are delayed by design. Every meaningful system has lag time built into it. The output never appears at the same moment as the input. Behavior needs feedback immediately to survive. Results cannot provide that feedback early. They arrive too late. When results are used as the signal, behavior starves before the system has a chance to mature. This is not impatience. This is a category error. The presence of doubt during lag time does not mean something is broken. It means the system is operating normally. Doubt appears precisely when behavior is correct, but outcomes are still invisible. That is the danger zone. Not because the work is failing, but because evaluation becomes tempting. And evaluation during lag time is always emotional, no matter how rational it sounds. Here is the hard rule that cannot be bent. Results are not qualified to decide continuation during lag time. They do not have the authority. They are not present yet. Using them empove hands control to feeling. Feeling then pretends to be judgment. Judgment then interferes with execution. This is how systems die quietly, without a single obvious mistake. The fatal error is not stopping the work. It is changing the criteria mid-process. When results are used to judge progress, the system is no longer being operated, it is being negotiated with. Emotion steps in and starts asking for reassurance. The moment reassurance is required, structure loses authority, execution slows, consistency weakens. The system begins to decay from the inside. This is why the problem is never the behavior. The behavior is often fine. The structure is often fine. What kills the system is evaluation, specifically. Evaluation that uses outcomes as a proxy for correctness before the system has completed a full cycle. That mistake shifts control away from execution and hands it to mood. To survive this phase, the system needs a different signal, not a better result, a different form of proof. This is where operational proof becomes non-negotiable. Operational proof is not evidence that the system is winning. It is evidence that the system is being executed, nothing more, nothing less. Operational proof answers only one question, and it allows no substitutes. Was the behavior executed today according to the structure, or not? That is the entire evaluation. There is no secondary question, no adjustment clause, no optimization discussion. If the behavior was executed correctly, the system continues. If it was not, behavior is corrected. The system itself is never questioned during lag time. This shift is what keeps systems alive. It removes interpretation. It removes debate. It removes emotional authority. Execution becomes binary. Done or not done. The moment gray areas appear, emotion has already entered. Binary evaluation is not harsh. It is protective. It prevents the mind from rewriting reality to escape responsibility. The rule is simple and absolute. There are only two valid states: executed or not executed. There is no almost, no kind of, no progress. Progress is a result metric. It is banned during lag time. Structure does not care how it feels. It only checks whether it was followed. This binary lock is what strips emotion of its power. Emotion cannot argue with a yes or no. It cannot negotiate with a completed action. It can only interfere when interpretation is allowed. Operational proof shuts that door completely. Responsibility returns to execution, where it belongs. Here is where most people resist. They want to adjust, they want to optimize, they want to tweak the system because they feel uneasy. That impulse is not intelligence, it is fear wearing a rational mask. During lag time, every urge to improve is suspect. Every urge to change direction is emotional contamination. Adjustment before results is sabotage. Optimization before evidence is self-interference. The system has not produced output yet, so there is nothing to optimize against. Any change made during this phase is based on discomfort, not data. And discomfort is not a valid input. The rule is strict for a reason. During lag time, there is a total ban on modification. No refinement, no tuning, no strategic shifts. The system must be allowed to run untouched long enough for results to emerge. Until then, the only permissible action is execution. This is where discipline is actually tested, not in effort, but in restraint, the ability to not interfere, the ability to not demand reassurance, the ability to keep running the system without emotional feedback. That is what separates systems that survive from systems that implode quietly. Operational proof keeps the system alive by anchoring evaluation to action, not outcome. It forces responsibility to stay where it belongs. If the work was done, the system continues. If it was not, behavior is corrected immediately. No stories, no explanations, no self-analysis. This is not motivational, it is mechanical. It removes the self from the equation and replaces it with procedure. That is why it works. Meaning does not come from seeing results early. Meaning comes from honoring execution when results are absent. Every strong system passes through this phase. Every one. The ones that survive are not the ones with more belief. They are the ones with stricter evaluation rules. They do not ask the wrong questions. They do not listen to emotional noise. They protect execution from interpretation. The moment results are allowed to speak during lag time, the system is already compromised. Results do not have voting rights yet. They have not earned them. Until they arrive, they are irrelevant. Execution is the only authority. This is the condition that cannot be bypassed. If the system is not evaluated by operational proof, it will be evaluated by feeling, and feeling will always choose comfort over continuity. That choice is invisible at first. Then it becomes permanent, so the rule is locked here. During lag time, results have no voice. The system lives or dies based on operational proof alone. Execution decides, not hope, not fear, not impatience. If the system survives this phase, it earns the right to be judged later, not now. Now it must be protected, and once it is protected long enough to produce results, a new threat emerges. Not collapse, not failure, something quieter, long-term erosion. That is the next problem. Chapter 10. Long-term erosion. This is the most dangerous phase because nothing looks broken. You did not quit. You did not collapse. You did not lose discipline. You still show up. You still execute. You still do the work. From the outside, everything appears stable, but underneath that surface, something critical has already gone wrong. The system is moving, but it is no longer evolving. Motion is still there, direction is not. And that is how erosion begins. Not with failure, with quiet drift. Long-term erosion is not collapse. Collapse is loud. Collapse forces attention. Erosion is silent. It hides inside consistency. It survives inside discipline. You can be busy every day and still go nowhere. You can be reliable and still decay. The defining signal is simple. You are still doing the actions. You are still doing them regularly. But nothing is changing at the level that matters. No expansion, no progression, no sharpening of the edge, just movement without transformation. That is not a discipline problem. That is an axis problem. A system can only evolve when it is organized around a single axis, not a list of goals, not a collection of priorities. One axis, one direction of advancement. The axis is not what you want. It is what the system is allowed to serve. During any given phase, only one axis is permitted to exist. Everything else must submit to it or be removed. When multiple axes are allowed to compete, the system loses coherence, energy spreads, decisions slow, progress dilutes, and erosion begins immediately, even if effort remains high. Most people confuse an axis with ambition. They treat it like a checklist. They stack goals. They balance priorities. They try to move everything forward at once. That feels responsible. It feels mature. It feels disciplined, but it kills the system. An axis is not a menu. It is a constraint. It defines what matters now and, more importantly, what does not. Without a defined axis, every action can be justified, and when everything is justified, nothing is protected. The system does not fail because it lacks discipline. It fails because it lacks exclusion. This leads to the next law. Binary elimination is mandatory. Every action must be classified immediately. It either serves the axis or it does not. There is no middle category. No later. No sometimes. No, this is also good. The moment you allow gray areas, the axis weakens. The moment you delay elimination, fragmentation begins. Indecision is not neutral. It is corrosive. If an action does not push the axis forward, it must be removed, not debated, not optimized, removed. Most erosion happens because people refuse to eliminate. They keep activities that feel productive but do not move the axis. They protect habits because they are familiar. They defend tasks because they look responsible. Over time, these non-axis actions accumulate. They drain energy. They consume attention. They create the illusion of progress while blocking real advancement. The system stays busy. The operator stays tired. And evolution stops. This is where the no compensation law becomes critical. Doing well on the main objective does not grant permission to drift elsewhere. Discipline does not earn flexibility. Success on axis does not justify off-axis behavior. This is one of the most common structural failures. People use discipline as a moral credit. They work hard, then spend that effort on activities that dilute the axis. They believe consistency buys balance. It does not. Compensation is a lie. Every off-axis action, no matter how small, weakens the system. Discipline cannot offset dilution. It can only mask it temporarily. Then comes the timing principle. The value of an action is secondary to its timing within the system. A good action at the wrong time is destructive. Something can be objectively useful and still damage the axis if it is executed out of sequence. This is why smart systems still fail. Intelligence cannot override timing. Effort cannot override timing. Discipline cannot override timing. Every action must be evaluated by its immediate impact on the axis, not its abstract value. If it does not push the axis now, it does not belong now, because timing matters more than value. Decision speed becomes essential. You cannot afford long debates. You cannot afford emotional negotiation. You cannot afford analysis loops. There is only one valid question before any decision. Does this action push the axis forward right now? If the answer is unclear, it is eliminated. If the benefit is indirect, it is eliminated. If it requires explanation, it is eliminated. Speed protects coherence. Hesitation destroys it. This is where erosion accelerates or stops. Systems that survive are ruthless here. They do not protect good ideas. They protect alignment. They do not reward effort. They reward direction. They do not confuse motion with progress. They audit everything through the axis. That is how evolution is preserved even when life feels stable, especially when life feels stable. Long-term erosion is seductive because it does not hurt at first. You are still disciplined. You are still functional. You are still respected, but the edge is gone. The pressure is gone. The system is no longer sharpening itself, and without sharpening, decay is guaranteed. Stability without direction is not safety. It is slow death. There is no negotiation with this law. Outside the axis is sabotage. Not eventually, immediately. There are no harmless distractions, no balanced detours, no neutral actions. Everything either reinforces the axis or erodes it. The moment you accept that, the noise disappears, decision-making becomes fast, energy consolidates, progress returns. This chapter closes with one final lock. Once the axis is defined, there are only two valid system states, running correctly or drifting. There is no third option, no maintenance mode, no holding pattern. You either enforce the axis every day or erosion resumes, not because you are weak, because systems do not tolerate ambiguity. The next chapter ends the system completely, because once the axis is locked, there is no more optimization, no more learning, no more theory. There is only execution or drift, and nothing in between. Chapter 11, the final condition. There is no recognized middle state. There never was. Either the system is being executed, or drift is already happening. Nothing you feel changes this condition. Nothing you intend alters it. Reasons do not suspend it. Circumstances do not soften it. The system does not acknowledge effort that stops short of execution. It only registers one thing, whether the structure is being run or not. Everything established so far leads here, meaning does not begin with emotion. Emotion is volatile. It spikes, fades, and contradicts itself, meaning begins after structured behavior has been executed long enough to create evidence of responsibility. Motivation is not the ignition, it is the exhaust. It appears after the system has been run, not before. Reverse the order and the engine floods. Demand motivation first and you guarantee stall. This has already been proven by every failed restart that relied on feeling ready instead of being operational. Behavior creates structure. Structure produces meaning. Meaning generates motivation. That sequence does not bend. It does not accelerate because you want it to. It does not forgive impatience. Any attempt to reorder it produces the same result, short bursts of effort followed by longer periods of drift. This is not because you lacked desire. It is because you violated sequence. Systems punish disorder. A system is only recognized as running when its structure is being executed, not when it is planned, not when it is discussed, not when it is believed in. Execution is the condition of recognition. If the structure is not being executed, the system is not active. There is no partial credit. There is no almost. The default state in the absence of execution is drift. That is not a judgment. It is a classification. This is where most people attempt to negotiate. They argue from intention. They argue from difficulty. They argue from context. The system does not respond. It is binary. Either the structure was executed or it was not. Either the condition was met or it was not. When execution stops, drift resumes automatically. Not because you failed, but because nothing is holding the line. The final evaluation allows only one metric. Feelings are excluded. Intentions are excluded. Plans are excluded. Only operational proof is admissible. Did the structure run, or did it not? That question collapses every excuse. It cannot be reframed. It cannot be softened. It does not care how convincing your reasons sound. It only cares whether execution occurred. This is the moment where responsibility becomes unavoidable. Responsibility is not the promise to do better tomorrow. Responsibility is the refusal to lie about today. If the structure was executed, the system is running. If it was not, drift is in effect. Anything else is narrative. Narratives do not operate systems. At the end, all exceptions are locked out. No circumstance changes the condition of recognition. No hardship replaces execution. No good intention substitutes for structure being run. The operating conditions do not negotiate. They never did. The belief that they might is what kept drift alive. This is not a motivational close. It is a termination of ambiguity. There is no final lesson to apply. There is no secret left to reveal. There is only a condition to meet. When the structure is executed, the system runs. When it is not, drift resumes. That is the entirety of the choice. Most people search for permission to stop drifting. They look for a signal, a feeling, a sign that it is time to commit. That signal does not exist. Permission is not granted externally. It is earned internally by executing structure without emotional guarantees. The system does not reward hope. It rewards compliance. From this point forward, the question "should I" is invalid. It has no operational value. The only question that remains is whether the system is being executed. If it is, continue. If it is not, stop pretending and accept the classification. Acceptance is not surrender. It is accuracy. Accuracy is the prerequisite for any correction. Drift persists because it thrives on ambiguity. It survives in the gap between intention and execution. This chapter closes that gap. There is nowhere left to stand that feels neutral. There is no stance that allows comfort without responsibility. The system either runs or it does not. Everything else is commentary. This is why the end feels severe. It is not because the system is harsh. It is because ambiguity has been removed. Ambiguity allowed delay to masquerade as preparation. It allowed emotion to masquerade as progress. It allowed movement to masquerade as structure. All of that ends here. If you are executing the structure, you do not need reassurance. The system will generate its own meaning in time. If you are not executing the structure, no reassurance will save you. Drift will continue whether you acknowledge it or not. The system does not require belief. It requires action under conditions. This is the final condition. There are no extensions. There are no alternative interpretations. There is no next chapter that explains it again in softer language. There is no safety net below this point. That is not cruelty. That is clarity. You now know the rules the system responds to. You know what grants legitimacy and what does not. You know that feelings do not authorize action, and that intentions do not sustain systems. You know that structure is not optional, and execution is not symbolic. Knowledge does not change the condition. Only compliance does. If the structure is executed today, the system is running today. If it is not, drift is active today. Tomorrow is irrelevant until today is classified correctly. This is how responsibility stops being theoretical and becomes operational. There is nothing left to add. There is nothing left to soften. Either run the system or accept the drift. That is not advice. That is the condition under which everything else already operates.